This is Understanding Tools and Best Practices for Creating Enterprise Forms in SharePoint 2013. Who's been to one of my talks before? Anyone? Okay, handful. Thank you for coming back. I really appreciate that. That's nice. That's my name. It's Darvish. You can just call me D if you want to. I am from the States. So if I've earned the right to make fun of Americans. And being in London for a few days and watching other Americans. So I'm with Microsoft. I've been there for quite a while now, and my email and my Twitter name are up here. These are the two books that I've worked on for Microsoft Press. This one's been out for a while, the InfoPath book, and then we're just wrapping up the Inside Out SharePoint 2013 book, which was an effort I did with Penny Coventry, who a lot of you probably know, and a couple other folks. And so that one is available digitally now, I think, but the print copy will be available later. And the reason I'm doing this is not because I'm being overly self-promotional, which would be very American of me. I'm putting this up here because I'll probably give away a handful of books in my session for folks that may want one. If you make me laugh or you give a good answer to a question, I may offer you a book. So, the 2 miles didn't qualify. Yeah. Nice try, though. Keep it up. All right, so with that, if you've been to my talks before, you know that I landed in this niche of talking quite a bit about forms and SharePoint and InfoPath. I'm not actually with the InfoPath product team, which a lot of folks have come to think that I am because I wrote that book and because I'm always talking about InfoPath at these conferences. So I do still have a job, right? I got asked that question a few times already, so do you still have a job at Microsoft? And the reason that comment has come up, as many of you know, there's been some speculation about what's going on with our form strategy and with InfoPath. So hopefully I'll be able to clarify that for those of you in this talk, okay? And I forgot it's actually being recorded on video, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the straight story anyway. So maybe next year when I'm back here, I won't actually work at Microsoft. We'll see. This is my 4th time doing this event. It's definitely one of my favorite conferences to speak at. So appreciate everyone coming in, and thank you for having me back. Let me get a quick show of hands. Are there folks in here who are not already familiar with InfoPath? Are you new to InfoPath? Anyone? And if you are, that's okay. Looks like only a couple. Okay. All right, so then we'll just all start with some assumptions about your current level of knowledge of our form strategy. One more question before I get rolling. What did you guys think you're going to hear about in this talk today? Forms. Okay. HTML5, okay. Access services. Those are 3 really good ones. Anything else?
How can you connect more than one lookup data in the InfoPath form?
Okay.
Have a dynamic one with read and write.
So a very specific InfoPath question, all right. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I like to make sure expectations are set because this talk is not all about InfoPath today. It is partially about InfoPath, okay? Because I know a lot of you might be looking for content on InfoPath. There are other talks here at the event that are specific to InfoPath. I'm going to be spending some time on it. This talk, part of the purpose of this is just to clarify what the form strategy is so that you know what tools are available and what options there are and where we're headed. All right, thank you for the input. Anything else?
Manage metadata.
Pardon?
Manage metadata in enterprise forms.
Have you been at all my talks? So his comment, for those of you who didn't hear, was when are we going to have managed metadata available in InfoPath? We're not. We're not, and let me just get it out of the way right up front. We're not going to do it. As far as I know, it's never going to happen. Okay? And I'm not one of those presenters that gets offended if people want to leave the talk in the middle. I don't actually care where you go, right? So I'm being a little facetious. Let me expand on the comment when I get to that point and talk about what we are and are not going to do, or at least what I know today. So some of the key takeaways that I'd like you to get from this talk are, first of all, SharePoint 2013 has a few new options available for doing forms in business, right? Your current investments in InfoPath are fully supported in SharePoint 2013. So if you haven't had a chance to play with this yet, if you have 2010 forms that you built, those forms generally migrate to 2013 no problem without making any changes. I had a customer that I did some work with when we were in beta, because this particular customer actually had quite a fair amount of complex forms. Some of them had code, and we wanted to use them as a test. And we actually had very good luck just taking their forms as they sat in 2010, moving them over, and they worked fine. Okay? So know that at a minimum, you can bring your 2010 forms over to 2013. The 2013 platform was just released. There's a version of InfoPath that's the 2013 version. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So you have plenty of life left in the InfoPath investment. Okay, because I know some people are nervous about what's going on with that product. Is it going away? Microsoft hasn't been talking about it very much. So I'll give you more background on that in a minute. Just know your investments in the 2010 forms are still supported in 2013. This one is the item that's caused a fair amount of controversy. I talked about this topic at SharePoint conference in Las Vegas last fall. There's been a recent blog post on the SharePoint team blog, if you haven't seen that, about this topic. In SharePoint 2013, we made quite a large investment in access services. How many of you immediately get uncomfortable when I start talking about access? Many of you? Yes. Okay, that's fair. So yeah, just acknowledge it right up front. That way we don't have to try and sweep it under the rug. Access 2013, we're going to spend a little bit of time on that in this session so that at least you understand when and where you would use it for forms. It is a new option. For highly custom forms, of course, for those of you that are developers in the room, because of the new app model in SharePoint 2013, you have a number of interesting new options for creating custom development forms, and there's several benefits to doing that if you are a developer and you have the time and the resources to do that. I will dive into this more towards the end of the talk. Okay, any questions right now about this so far? I want to make sure we're all very clear. Yeah? Okay. Are you guys, how was lunch? I actually missed it. Was it good? It's pretty good? Yeah?
The chicken was really good.
The chicken was really good? Yeah. Seems like the chicken might be slowing you down a little bit right now. That's good. I'm glad to hear lunch was good. I stayed up a little late last night, so I didn't need lunch. InfoPath 2013. As I mentioned, it is fully supported in SharePoint 2013. There is a 2013 version of InfoPath. If you have not seen it yet, it looks strikingly similar to 2010 because actually nothing's changed in the UI at all except for the logos and some of the labels reference 2013 now. There is one big difference, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it does continue to provide great form customization solutions for business users. We are not encouraging you to step away from InfoPath if that's the tool that you're comfortable with. Okay? If you are a brand new InfoPath customer and you're thinking about making large investments in it, then you probably have some little tougher decisions to make. I already talked about that. The last pillar over there, this is the one big change in the 2013 version of InfoPath is we got rid of the sort of mini development environment that InfoPath 2010 had, and we now support the full Visual Studio development environment. So when you go into InfoPath and you click on Edit Code or whatever button you're clicking on, it will launch into the full Visual Studio 2012. Okay? And then you have the full power of Visual Studio 2012 at your fingertips for writing InfoPath solutions, which is pretty cool. So we wanted to make sure that the developer experience here was the same as it was across the other products. Okay? I'll show you that briefly. So this is InfoPath 2013. In in my book, there is a sample form that I use pretty regularly, which is this one. It's fairly simple, but it's a good one to sort of illustrate some of the power of InfoPath. In this case, I'm not going to go through the whole form probably for the sake of time in this session, but this form is available as a sample that you can download for free. And this form is the same one that I used to build the Access Services form, or the same model that I used to build the Access Services form, and the same model that Matt Bremer's session on Wednesday, where he is doing the JavaScript, HTML, TypeScript deep dive into development. He will be showing this form as well, the same form. Okay, so if you want to see a fully coded version of this, Matt's talk on Wednesday will be a chance to do that. So when a user runs this form, just for those of you who haven't seen it, basically what it does is it prompts the user through a series of screens where it asks them some questions because they want to create a site for records management in SharePoint. So they're doing a request to their IT department for a site to contain certain types of records. So in this case, I could say I'm going to have contracts, and then we have these little arrow buttons at the bottom that, for those of you that can't see, I'm sorry, little arrow buttons at the bottom that have rules behind them that allow the user to navigate in between the screens so they don't have to guess about how to move throughout the form. So this is the second screen where they actually are prompted to select a type of format. So let me say, for example, physical only. You notice when I click the button that the label changes, the user's prompted then to either click forward or backwards in the form. Pretty straightforward stuff, right? For those of you who have not seen it before, the end result of this, when the user is done, is they would click Save or Submit, and the form would get posted into a SharePoint library. In this case, this is one that's on Office 365, so we're connected to the cloud. And some of the fields from that form are then elevated as columns within the forms library. Now, all of you that have done InfoPath work, I understand this is really basic. Okay? And then if the user wants to go back in and edit the form, they can just click on it, and it will take them in to the browser-based version of the form where they get the same UI that they had in the client. Can we pause there? Are there any questions about the form or what we're talking about? Okay. So if I open that form in the client, I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it with a different name for the purposes of this demo, which is going to be a very short one. I'm just going to call this test, Blue Yonder. What I'm going to do on my form is I'm going to go to the main page, and just to show you developers the new Visual Studio stuff, I'm going to go in here and add a button. And on my button, I'm going to go in and edit the form code. Let this pull up. And so when I do that, what happens is InfoPath then opens up Visual Studio 2012 for me, creates a new project, and puts my cursor right here where I need to start writing my code for that button. So it's pretty handy, and I now have the full power of the Visual Studio environment available to me. And if I write some code, which I won't bore you with very much of that, but oh, you know what? Darvish made one little mistake. I'm going to set my form options, in this case, to compatibility to just the filler form. So this is just going to be a client-side form for now. Go back into my button. And the reason I did that is because that will let me write code that is specific to client-side stuff. So we're going to do just a message box, .show, and let's see, you guys probably don't say hello world here, do you? What do you say here? You do? That seems so boring. We'll do this instead. How's that? So once I've typed my code in, I've got my Visual Studio environment, I've got my code. I get the nice green start button up there at the top. Click on that. I have the full power of the debugging environment in Visual Studio available to me for my InfoPath form. And it will go ahead and fire up my form. And when I click my button, we get our pop-up window. Okay, so I don't have time in this session to really go into all the details of the development stuff, but the point you should walk away with from here is there was a big investment made to make sure that InfoPath 2013 and Visual Studio are now playing very nicely together. So for developers, this is a pretty good story, because I know a lot of developers have very mixed opinions of InfoPath, right? Understandably so. Questions, comments about that? Was the question, what if you don't have Visual Studio? Well, then your options are going to be somewhat limited. So yes, if you're going to develop in InfoPath 2013, you really want to have a copy of Visual Studio. Yeah. If you don't, then you're either not writing code with InfoPath, or you're probably looking at an HTML-based form or something else. Okay? Good question?
Also, debugging of server-side-based code. And is it available compared to publisher code for web?
Server-side code for InfoPath? The story really hasn't changed much from 2010. The developer story is that I now have the right tool for the job, but the rest of the model really hasn't changed at all. Yeah. I'm actually not going to let you lure me in any further than that. All right. Good question. Thank you. You're well on your way to earning a book before this talk's over. Or not. All right. So that's a quick demo in InfoPath 2013, just to let you know that that is all there now. We'll use this form again later, but I think that's probably good enough for right now. Go back over here.
Are you moving away from InfoPath now?
Pardon?
Are you moving away from InfoPath now for the rest of the review?
Not necessarily.
Can I ask you a quick question then before we move?
If you're going to ask me the same one that you asked in the beginning, then I would encourage you to, let's have that one-to-one, because that probably is a little more specific than...
It's just a general one.
Okay, sure.
The form-based authentication didn't work quite well with 2010 products and InfoPath 2010 and 2007. Is it the same story over here in 2013?
Yeah, so the question is, the forms-based authentication that was available in 2010?
Yeah, and anonymous access, if you go for a form library, they won't work with it. Is it still same with 2013?
You have more options for authentication in 2013 than you had in 2010. That really has nothing to do with InfoPath. It's really more about SharePoint. Okay? I think you will still run into some, for InfoPath specifically, you probably basically have the same choices that you had before. For some of the other things we're going to talk about where you're going to be using, the app model uses OAuth, you will have many more options. Okay? Which is part of the reason why the story here is if InfoPath fits, great. If not, there are some other new options. Right? And I think people got a little confused about the message over the last few months, like move away from InfoPath to these other things. That's not the message. It's pick the right tool. Okay? Access 2013. So a number of you have already told me that you're not very comfortable with Access as a solution. And I'm assuming that's because of Access, its product legacy, which is that it sprawls out throughout the organization and becomes very unmanageable. People put business applications in it that really should be managed by IT, et cetera. So I'm not really going to talk about that use of Access. In SharePoint 2013, the story is quite a bit different. In fact, if I was king of the world, I would not have named this product Access 2013. Because what we can do with it really is more than what folks think of when they think of traditional Access. It arguably could have been called SharePoint Forms Designer, but I didn't get my way. So, and that would have made you much more comfortable with it too, right? Yeah. Okay, I'll take that feedback back to Redmond. Access 2013. So we did invest pretty heavily in Access 2013 to allow non-code forms and apps in SharePoint. Okay? It is an interesting new option. Subject matter experts can capitalize on their domain knowledge, and what I mean by that is if I want to build a quick little form app in SharePoint using Access, as a business user, I can probably do that, much like I can with InfoPath. In many ways, Access is even easier than InfoPath is. Okay? And developer experience not required. So there are some pretty big architectural differences with Access 2013 that are important to understand if you're going to look at this. And this does work just fine in Office 365 as well. So if you're going to go to the cloud for SharePoint, everything that I'm doing here is using Office 365-based SharePoint sites. It does fully support the cloud app model. The data layer, so when you create an Access form, what happens is very different than what happens when you create an InfoPath form. InfoPath form, you guys know what happens when you do that and you save it to SharePoint? Pardon? Yeah, exactly. When you submit an InfoPath form to a SharePoint library, it basically saves the XML within the library, correct? Now that has advantages and disadvantages, depending on your scenario. And it's important to understand when to make the right choice. In this case, Access takes a very different approach in that the data, when you build one of these Access apps, is all stored inside of SQL and or Azure. So that has a number of advantages from a manageability standpoint, from a storage standpoint, but there are some downsides with that as well, because the data from in the back end is not sitting in a list somewhere. Right? It is in the database behind the scenes. You don't go look at a list and see the data from your Access forms like you do your InfoPath forms. Like I said, it has advantages and disadvantages. The user experience is probably my personal favorite part of why you might want to use Access for forms. So I don't have an iPad with me today. Unfortunately, I should have grabbed one. But when you look at the form that I'm going to show you in Access, it works just fine across devices. So I can open up the same form. I designed the form once in Access 2013, publish it to SharePoint, and it works just fine on an iPad, on a laptop, on a tablet, whatever device it happens to be, as long as it supports HTML. Okay? And to me, that is one of the big advantages. If I need to quickly build a little app or a little form for an audience that might be on mobile devices or tablets, InfoPath can be very problematic because it really wasn't designed for that world where Access 2013 works just fine. Okay? And you can share your apps, your Access form apps, through the store in SharePoint 2013. So if you have a corporate catalog of apps inside your company, you can easily publish your Access apps there and let other people consume your form. Right? And all of the benefits of the app model within that. And that's really the key message here. InfoPath does not support the cloud app model that's new in SharePoint 2013, which has so many advantages that we can't cover them all in this room, and there'll be a number of talks about that this week. Access natively is built using the new cloud app model. Okay? Questions?
If the data is stored in a SQL server instead of a list item, do you still have a workflow start when you submit a new form?
Then what happens when you submit the form?
Yeah, can we have a workflow that starts when we submit the form? We often do this with InfoPath, so you fill in a form,
Yeah.
you submit,
Yeah.
and then the form is picked up by a workflow.
Oh, right, workflow. Sorry, yeah, I didn't catch workflow. Yes, so this is one of the disadvantages of Access versus InfoPath. Because we're not storing them in a list, there's no native workflow integration. So you have, here again, this is one of the areas where this is one of the major disadvantages of this. If it needs to be workflow integrated, that's not there today. Now, I will tell you, that is the #1 feature request for these Access apps. And so I think it is very likely, and I don't have a specific date yet, but I think it's very likely that we will add the workflow integration to the Access apps. Okay? Now there are ways around it. If you're a developer, there are creative solutions that you can do, but it's certainly not out of the box. Yep. So if you needed forms that integrate natively with workflow today, your best choices are still to use InfoPath or to look to one of our partners like Nintex or someone like that that has, form solutions with workflow. Okay. Let's go. I think he had his hand up first. We'll go here.
One of the complaints about Access in the past was that because the data layer was kind of copied to lists, the performance wasn't that hot. I kind of heard that with it being written to SQL now, it was a lot faster than before. Kind of roughly, how much better does it perform?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. So for those of you, if you didn't hear his comment, it was Access did not have a reputation for being particularly fast in the past the way that it worked, right? The way it works now is that the UI is Access, but all the back end is SQL. And so when you submit a form or when you're working with it, yes, that is one of the first things you'll notice is that the performance is very snappy, right? And the reason is because, especially on an Office 365 site, there's really, the performance is all about SQL and Azure and less about Access running on a client, right? And so it's actually quite good. I don't know what the statistics are and how much faster it is. My experience with it so far, and part of the reason why I'm a fan, is when I submit an Access app, so you'll have to test it and try it. Yeah, good question. I'm not sure that I have a very scientific answer for you other than to say it feels pretty good to me.
Because it's sending the data to SQL Server now, does that mean it's got better integration with reporting services?
Just because it's stored in SQL Server now, does that mean that you automatically get reporting services integration? No, not really. Not really. The data behind the scenes is in SQL, and if a developer could make connections to it, but we're not really doing anything out of the box to make it available via reporting services. That is a very good idea and one we're looking at, though. Okay.
Yeah, similar question. Is the data saved in SQL Server in a logical way? So can you easily get the data to VCS or reporting service?
Yeah, so again, the answer is if you have to use the APIs to get to the data, right? It's not that we don't expose them in a list or any, sort of, but you.
It's stored logically, in a logical way. It's not with GUIDs and everything. I don't know.
Yeah, yes, and so short answer is yes. Longer answer I probably don't have time for, but I would encourage you to go, if you want to look into the developer details of how you do that, we have data on that on the Access 2013 site on MSDN. There's quite a bit of stuff on Access 2013 for developers on there, okay? So, but yeah, unfortunately there's no way for a business user to get at the data. But I'll show you the way it works in a minute, and in a lot of cases it won't matter, right? Because what this is for simple, quick form apps. One more and then I'll move on, yeah.
About the licenses, is it the same? Do you need the same license as InfoPath? So if you want to open it in Access, you need standard. If you want to open it in browser, is it enterprise?
I don't think, so I'm the wrong guy to ask about licensing, but that is one of the cases where you'd want to use InfoPath rather than Access is if you need true offline capabilities. The app model assumes that I'm connected to the cloud or connected to your hosted environment in your data center. There's no offline version of what I'm going to show you, okay? Good questions, thank you. Right, so creating an Access 2013 form app, this is a screenshot of what it looks like when you go to generate a new one, and we give you a bunch of sample apps that you can build. Now, I'm doing another session later this week, I think it's Wednesday, right before lunch, I think, where I'm going to dive into the details of Access apps quite a bit more than I have time for in this session. And so that talk, it won't be specifically just about forms, it will just be about Access 2013 building apps for that topic specifically. As I mentioned earlier, the result that you get when you generate an Access 2013 app is an HTML-based form, and so there's a number of benefits to that, right? Because it's adhering to the app model. The designer is also, it's an HTML-like experience, so it's very easy to drag and drop fields and move things around. It's not an experience that you've had before in Access. If you've used Access before, this is a little different. There are different types of forms that you can create, single item forms for data entry or multiple item forms for more complex things where you need search and navigation as part of the form. So this is a screenshot of the forms designer itself, and this is one of the out-of-the-box samples that we give you. But this UI here, I'll show you in a moment in a demo. It's pretty simple to use, right? You create your fields, you put them on the form, and then once you're done with that, there's a button that says publish. I think it says publish, and boom, everything in the middle is taken out for you. All you have to do is build the form with the Access Designer, click publish, and you now have an app available to you on your site. And so that being able to rapidly build it, publish it, test it, deploy it with a single click is part of the appeal here, right? Developers who want to get more in depth, this isn't necessarily your cup of tea, I understand that. All right, so let's take a quick look at that. I'm going to, maybe I should sit down so I'm not standing in your way. So here I have a 2013 SharePoint site, and on there I have a link. It says, click here to create a new site request form. When I click on that, what's going to happen is you'll see the end user experience of an Access 2013 app here. So to create this, I use the client-side access, which I'll show you in a second, and then when I'm done, I click publish, and basically it created it here, because that's where I told it I wanted it. So when someone comes in here, they click on the, you get this very simple toolbar on an Access 2013 app. If they want to add a new record, they click add. You'll notice I have a message there that says this is a required field, and we'll just call this SP Evo, that was odd, and contracts. Click on next page, and one of the things you might not have caught, it still says it on the screen here, is changes saved. So when I built this, I was trying to model the InfoPath version of my form as closely as I could, so that someone who is trying to understand the new app model could just take a look at my sample form from InfoPath, which you can get, and then replicate it in Access 2013. So there are things happening when I click the arrows. There are rules behind the scenes, but in Access we don't call them rules, we call them macros. And so they're basically mirroring the same thing we did in InfoPath. So when I click the next page button or arrow, not only is it switching views for me, but it's also saving the form for the user at that point in time. So we just, we have some really basic rules running behind the scenes here, just like we did in the InfoPath form. So they can go ahead and click through here and finish this, and I'll just uncheck some boxes as it asks me all these questions. And then where I eventually end up is with my form all filled out, and I can view all the details if I want to, or I can just go back to the home page of the form. So in the site, though, this is the thing that's a little confusing for people when they first see it, because I launched the form from a SharePoint site as an app, but this data, the hello world contracts and blah, that's actually that's sitting in SQL. That's not in the list where I can go point at that anywhere. Okay, so before I move on to the editing experience of that, are there any questions?
In 2010, you could link access straight to the list. So what you're saying is you've split that now, the data's not in.
Yeah, so his comment is in 2010 you could link access straight to the list. That's a little different functionality what I'm showing here. This is not the traditional Access database link to a list. This is using the Access UI to build a 2013 cloud app.
How would you see the results of lots of different forms? Where's the data collated when you were shaping the form? Where's the data collected? Well, I mean, if you submit one form, but if you have
Oh, right.
okay.
Okay. I actually have it taken off the screen intentionally because I want the user to only be working with one form at a time. When I show you the client-side experience, you'll get a chance to see what it would look like. But yes, I've stripped this down to the bare essentials because that's part of my best practices for users with forms is get rid of anything that might confuse them. I do have this view on the end of it that I can click on where it's all records. But in a lot of cases, I'll actually even remove that view if the user doesn't need to see all the records. I'll take that off there. All right, so in your access form, you'll get a little, in SharePoint, you'll get a little, the little gear icon up there, and the only thing that it will say is customize and access. So if you've not done that before, you can click on that, and it will open up the form in Access so that you can go ahead and make changes to it. Because what you'll find as you do this is you build, if you go to the SharePoint site as your starting point and you go in and you say, I want to create a new Access app, it will open it up in Access and you'll publish it, and you will find that you are reiterating on the changes in the form a lot. Like and so but the good news is it's very simple to do that because you can go back at any point in time, click on the gear, say edit it, and then when I make a change in my form, I'm not going to make one right now, but I was wrong, it doesn't say publish, it says launch app. So you click on launch app button and it saves your changes, pushes them up to the site, and you now have the updated app. And that literally is all it takes. So that changes the perspective of the way you're going to do change control on a form like this, right? You definitely want to test them, and then publish them to the production site because it's a real-time publish. When you click launch app, it updates whatever version of the app you had there before and replaces it with a new one. Okay? So in here, I'll probably go into more depth on this on Wednesday, but in here, I have a number of fields, and let's look at an example of a simple one. So I have this arrow here on the first view of the form. I have this arrow that allows the user to navigate to the next view, right? That's pretty basic stuff. But much like in InfoPath, if I go into the actions for that, you'll see that I have an action to, first of all, save the record as soon as the user clicks on it. So there's a save record action. And then the second thing I do is I tell Access to change the view when they click on the arrow to the next view, which in this case is a view called Formats. Right? Pretty simple stuff. But the point of that is I can, once I understand this new UI and building these apps in Access, I can replicate many of the same kinds of business logic things that people did in InfoPath without code in Access 2013. Okay? Yes, sir?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Are there any tools for migrating from InfoPath?
Are there any tools for migration from InfoPath to Access 2013? If there was, how much would you be willing to pay for it?
Well, it's not in a couple of cases, but there may be something that gets you started, does the basic form design or something.
Yes. So I've explored this question in depth myself because it would be really nice to have the tool. Maybe someone has seen one. I actually have not seen anyone that's produced a tool like this. We've talked to a couple of our big InfoPath development partners and talked to them about doing it. The challenge is, if you're a developer and you understand, if you stop and think about what would be required to take an XML-based application like InfoPath and all of the connections that it has into SharePoint and everything else and figure out how to make a tool that seamlessly migrates those forms to the new app model. One of our better InfoPath development partners told us that they thought it was probably a 2-year development effort to build that tool.
Yes, I think it would be feasible, but...
I think it would be feasible, but very challenging.
Well, impractical, should I say.
Yeah.
But the basic design of the layouts and stuff, it may be possible to have something that pulls that across, and then you just need to do the action behind it.
Yeah, it's the logic behind it that's the tricky part because you're often connecting to other data sources and all these other things you'd have to take into account. So good question though. You had one more? Yeah.
One more, yeah.
Okay.
So this must have some source behind it, and I don't want to look at the source, but can you put this stuff in source control and look at between different versions?
No, we do. At this point, we do. You cannot view the code behind this.
Right. So how do you manage this? The configuration, manage the different versions?
The Access app itself, the versions of it. Yeah, you just have to use the app model way of doing things, which is different, right? Which is to say that it's not the traditional developer managing the versions strategy with this. I mean, most of the customers I work with that are doing this, they really just boils down to they have a test publishing location and a production publishing location. And it's so simple to publish it that they find that sometimes that works fine. Two more, real quick, and then I have to move on or we're going to run out of time. Yes?
Yeah, with the survey tool, will it remain a list type or will it also become
The survey tool? The SharePoint survey tool. I haven't seen anything that indicates we're going to move that away from being just a list. Yeah, I think that's going to stay the way it is.
Version history on the actual changes to the form, like the data, is that kept in any way? So if I fill out the form and then go change it, have I lost any auditing of the fact that it had original data before?
Nope, I don't think so.
And then really quickly, we lost user roles and stuff, obviously using access. We can part of user roles where you can expose parts of the form.
User access.
User roles.
Oh.
Say HR can use this part of the form or finance can use this part.
Yeah. Not user roles. There is the ability for the form to identify who the user is, and so you can get at that and use that within the form, but it's not using roles the same way InfoPath forms use roles. It does not do that. So we're using, in this case, well, because it's the app model, we're using OAuth for the way the app talks to SharePoint, right? And so that we did not implement the roles here the same way that they're used in InfoPath. Good questions.
Very quick.
Yeah.
Quick question about scope. As you deploy this app, presumably within the site it sits, the SQL gets scoped to that, gets filtered down to that. But if you were to place this in the catalog and then you made it available in different site collections, is it possible for it to point to the same piece of SQL? So you get the same back-end data, but multiple forms, or will it always be specific to the site that you're in?
The way that it works, it's specific to the site that you're in. Yeah, as far as I know, I don't, it's in the site. Yep. All right, so that's a little bit on Access. If you find that at all interesting or intriguing, you think that might be something you want to look into. Like I said, I'm going to give a talk in more depth on that topic on Wednesday. So if you want to learn more about Access 2013 apps, we'll go into more detail about just general apps, not just for forms. Okay, and then last but not least, or should be right on time, I think. Last but not least, web form apps. So because we're doing the 2013 SharePoint model, we now have the option to build form apps using Visual Studio, using Notepad, using Lightswitch. I don't know if you guys have seen Lightswitch. It's kind of an interesting tool that we have released but not talked about much. Whatever tool you really want to use to create HTML5 or ASPX-based forms, you can do that and publish them as apps in SharePoint 2013. So there's a number of benefits associated with that, which I've mostly already talked about, but those forms that require custom code can be written in now, nearly any language that you want to write them in. And if you're a developer and you're interested in really diving into this topic, like I said, Matt Bremer's doing a talk on Wednesday. I think it's actually at the same time as mine, which is fine. And he is going to go into depth on using TypeScript and JavaScript and some other things to build that same form that we just saw in Access. So again, if you use this model, the app model in 2013, you do automatically essentially get cross-device capable forms. So Access 2013 gives you that. Custom-coded forms using HTML5 will give you that. InfoPath, not so much. Okay, InfoPath forms, if you publish them as browser-based forms, you have to test them. Sometimes they work fine with non-Microsoft platforms, and sometimes they don't. So you have to take that into consideration. If you're a new SharePoint developer and you need to build a form, the learning curve is greatly reduced here now with the app model because I don't have to learn a bunch of SharePoint-specific stuff. I can build an HTML form and publish it pretty easily with the developer knowledge that I already have. So I really like this story for building forms because developers have consistently said, I hate SharePoint forms, I hate InfoPath, I want to use something else. Well, now you have plenty of other options. When you build a form app in SharePoint 2013, it's nice because you do have a variety of choices. So you saw the Access app that I built was a fully immersive app, right? Once the user clicks on the link or the button to launch that app to create a new form, there's really nothing else on the page that they're doing at that point in time other than working with the form. I personally like that because it removes all potential confusion for the user other than just the form I want them to work with. But you can also create these forms, HTML-based forms, as app parts. And so if it makes sense, you can just have part of the UI be the app, obviously. Or an extension app. So an extension app, there are a number of examples of where that might fit in with a form, but maybe a form is only one small part of the solution that you're building, and you'd rather just have it be a custom action. So you now have the option to do that. Any questions about that? So there were a couple other questions. Now, I'm basically at the end of the talk, unless there are other things that I skimmed by that you'd like to see in more depth. I can certainly go back to that. We have about 10 minutes left, so happy to take questions, or if there's anything you want me to pull back up, I will. Yes.
One quick question: if you use the Access form,
Yep.
in Access you have a database schema and all that kind of thing. So when you create a form, are you ever asked where you want to put the data, or does it just automatically put it into that site that you're working?
Well, yes, great question. So he's asking essentially when I create the Access form. So on the client side, you know, you have the standard Access stuff, right? So here's the table for the form, you know, the fields are in there, and you can go in and you can change the data types and all the standard things you would expect. But the process of actually creating the form initially is that I go, you know, however you choose to get there. In my case, if I go in and look at site contents, I can do add an app somewhere in here. We'll have an Access app. So when I click on that and generate the Access app, the app is there and it's within the context of the site, right? So here's my new app that I just generated and it's building it for me now. I'm in the cloud, right? And so the app is in the site, but I'm not sure if I've answered your question or not. I think it was along the lines of his question earlier.
Okay. So basically you don't have to worry about if you move that site, you'll take everything.
Yeah. And that is part of the beauty of the app model, right, is that things are much more sandboxed and easier to deal with than they were before, right? So there's not all of this. I mean, InfoPath is a great example of something that wasn't. So when you move it from site to site, you can have problems because you have hard-coded links into things that are URL specific. The app, you know, I can take that app that I just built there and I can publish it anywhere else in my SharePoint environment and it works fine.
One last question.
Yeah.
So your idea of using Access and then the ability to use the app model, is that the ability for Access for people that don't have developer experience, but if you have the developer experience, you would more recommend using the app model?
So yeah, the question is, do I use Access for building or do I use the app model and HTML5 JavaScript? It does depend on your skill set, obviously, right? A business user is going to probably do something quickly with Access. I mean, the power user, business user, non-developer is really the target audience for Access apps. Now, if a developer needs to, you know, bust something out quickly, I still think it's a nice solution, just like InfoPath is. But if you have needs that go beyond what Access and InfoPath do, and you want all the advantages of the app model, then it's pretty obvious that the way to do it is to, you know, fire up Visual Studio or whatever tool you want to use and write that thing with HTML5 and JavaScript. Publish it as an app, you get all the same benefits that I've talked about with Access, right? Except now you have, as a developer, you'll have full control over everything, obviously. Okay, thank you. Yes, and then we'll go here and then there.
If you're working with lists, where you're storing information in lists, would you still use InfoPath to customize forms, or what would you recommend?
For customizing the list form itself, yeah, that's It's probably the same answer that I gave to him. It depends on your skill set, right? Because you have more options now in customizing the SharePoint UI with using HTML5. I don't think, that's actually a good question. I'm not sure, is the list form customization option even still there in 2013? I don't actually know. We've de-emphasized that as a feature. Moving forward, so I'm going to be as transparent as I can. If I were you, I would use HTML5 tools to customize the list forms, not InfoPath. Because I don't think, despite the fact that we're going to continue to support InfoPath and it's not going away, I don't think that feature, that deep list integration with the forms, I don't think that capability will be continued forever, right? So hopefully that helps give you some direction, right? Oh, I'm sorry. I had one, hold on. I had one over here. Yeah.
So if you wanted to print out part of the forms, or if you need the text to be printed out, what would you suggest?
His question is printing forms. I honestly don't know. It's been so long since I've needed to print out a form, I'm not sure. I understand the requirement is there sometimes. Does anyone else have any creative ideas? I'm not sure. I mean, I guess you could just, if it's an access form, you just print it from the browser, right? If it's an immersive app, you won't have anything else on the screen other than the form. So what I'm being a little facetious because I don't actually have a great answer to the question. You could certainly do the same thing a lot of customers did with InfoPath throughout the years where they created print views, right? You could do the same thing with an access form or with an HTML5 form, right? So you saw the last view on the form that I had where it was kind of ugly, but it had all the stuff on it. I probably would create a print view. And then you would just be using the browser's print function. I don't know if anyone else has a better idea there or not, but.
Also subforms like it's used in the old access views would be available there?
If you wanted to put you could still put if you had multiple forms, you could have the information show up on a print view, yes. Mm-hmm. So that's on the fly, that's the best I can come up with, but I think that would work.
Question about
Yeah.
reporting, because with 2010 access services on-premise, you could use reports and they turn into views.
Yeah.
Question is, with Office 365,
Yeah.
you couldn't do that because SSRS was in place.
Right.
Has that all gone away now? Can we get the full functionality of reports?
I don't think that's changed, actually. Yeah.
You can't make a report in Access, publish it through as an app, and that will come up as a proper report.
Using reporting services? No, I don't think so.
Which permission do we need to publish access apps, and how can I control the item management level? Is it even possible to say, okay, on specific items people can do stuff, and others not?
Yeah, that is one of the challenges with the access apps, and that's another one of those areas where you say, if I need this kind of control, this might not be the right solution. Access works best in scenarios where it's pretty simple, right? It's like I'm trying to think of a word other than access. I have access to the access app or the site where that's in, or I don't, right? It's a little bit more black and white. There are workarounds you could do, but it'd probably be more work than it was worth. So yeah, it's similar to the roles question earlier, right? In that if I have the availability to use an access app, it's really looking at my site permissions, right? Not permissions within the app itself.
And which permission does a user need to publish apps? To publish access apps? Is it manage site, or is there a specific publish apps permission?
No. So the people that are creating the app designer needs a higher level of rights than the person who's publishing the apps or saving a form. Right? If I'm saving a form, all I need is basic site user rights.
Yeah, but to create such form and to launch it, like the button says, launch app.
Yeah.
Which permission does
site owner, I think.
Site owner,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yep. Yeah. So you don't want every user necessarily to be able to do that, but But again, part of the power here is you do actually want them within their little area, right? Presumably they have a site that they're an owner of. You want them to be able to do that with access, because it's not rocket science, right? And you had another one, and then we'll go here, and then I probably got to wrap.
The original integration with Access 2010 and SharePoint 2010, we published lists created straight into SharePoint. Is that gone now?
I haven't seen it. It means I'd have to double check. This is one of those cases where my email that I put up there earlier actually probably is going to be handy. So I don't know, I'd have to double check. There are some things that went away from what we had in 2010 in favor of the new app model. Okay? So, shoot me a mail.
Once you create an Access app, is it possible to then migrate data from another database easily into the SQL Server and populate your Access app?
No. It's not. Yeah, I'm just trying to be as honest as I can. The best use case here is I need an app, I need to collect some data, I want to store it, it needs to live in the site, and I'm probably not going to be doing a lot of connecting or touching to other data sources or any of the things that we might have done in InfoPath. The scope here is a little more narrow. It's very useful when it's the right tool, but it's not always the right tool.
So if I've created one of these forms in Access,
Yep.
is it possible for me to look at the source
No.
that was generated as a starting point
No.
for original steer?
No. His question is, can I look at the source code for the Access app? And that is something we are looking at turning on later. Right now, you do not have the ability to get in there to look at that. That shows up in the feature request list in the top 5. Workflow integration is definitely number 1 on the focus, though, because that feature itself, the lack of workflow integration, limits its usefulness for a lot of folks.
So is it, the app presumably is published like any other app?
Yes.
Right, so it's WSP in the manifest. So can I rename it to CAB and look at it?
I haven't actually tried that. I guess it might be worth a try. It's certainly not easy to get at the code behind one of these Access apps. We don't intentionally publish it. You'll have to hack it if you're going to do it. Okay. I think I'm out of time, actually. So I'll be around for just a few more minutes. Yeah, I am. So just as a follow-up on the last thing here, let me put my slide up with related sessions. So Lori is doing some InfoPath talks tomorrow. So if you want more deep dive on InfoPath, her 2 talks on building an actual working form are both tomorrow. Matt's doing that talk on JavaScript forms on Wednesday, and then I have the deeper dive on Access on Wednesday as well. And I will have an answer to a couple of those questions that you had about the integration stuff on Wednesday if we don't connect before then. I'll look into it before Wednesday. So thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. I'll be around all week, so thanks.